Hi, my name is Dani Gill, and I am the Audience Development Officer for Live Network, who are hosting this seminar today, Ideas, Inspiration and Support in Advance of the Literary Project Award. I am joined by Collette Farrell, the Director of the Droichead Arts Centre, member of Live Network, and Caelainn Hogan and Annemarie Ní Churreáin, who are both writers and have both actualised projects either collaboratively or independently as part of the most recent round of projects. So Collette, you are a member of the Live Network and you have been for the past 3 years. The Live Network comprises 6 venues nationally who have come together to support and develop literature at their venues. Can you maybe give a sense of what it's been like for you and your venue to be part of the network?
Yes, and thank you, Dani, and hello, everybody. I suppose for Droichead, what the Live Network first off has done is that it's actually brought literature into the conversation. It's hugely developed our whole literature programme, and it's also allowed us to develop our audiences for literature. So I arrived in Droichead in 2017, and literature wasn't developed, the same way, say, music or theatre or visual arts was. And again, like from talking to Dani earlier, I mean, that could be a case that when people come together, they come together, I suppose, to make theatre or they need to show an exhibition, whereas literature and writers, it can be maybe very much a solo kind of practice, and then you're going to publishers. So how do venues get out and make connections, I suppose, with writers? And ironically, I suppose enough for us is that there's a whole range of community writing groups within the town of Droichead, and also we were next door to the library as well. And it was like, how to put literature out there in the agenda? How can we make it kind of feature as part of our programme, and that it's there, and it's very much there on an annual basis. And I guess that's what Live has allowed us to do. We're working with 6 other venues, and then of course the brilliance of Dani Gill, the curator, and she's just been amazing over the last 3 years to work with. So the 6 centres, I suppose, some of us are very similar, and then there's differences as well. It's given us the opportunity, I suppose, to come together and talk about all things literature, and very much guided by Dani. So, over the last 3 years, we've had writers on stage in conversation, but then with COVID, we've had writers online, in conversation with Dani. We've had outreach programs. We had the wonderful Donal Ryan there with this beautiful outreach program where he wrote 10 letters to 10 members of our audiences, and they wrote back to him as well, and the feedback on that has absolutely been amazing. And again, that was all managed through Dropbox. And then to kind of working again with Caelainn as well, and having kind of, I suppose, issue-based and thought-provoking kind of work. And with Caelainn and kind of the Republic of Shane program, we had that online. But I also know as well that two other art centres in the network are engaging with Caelainn in a different way as well. And then this autumn, we've Booker Prize winner Douglas Stewart on stage with Elaine Feeney, who featured as part of our online program a year ago. So it's like making connections and developing these relationships that hopefully will continue on, I suppose, into the future. And I suppose what it's done is it's bringing literature to the forefront. It's not, and I'm not saying it was an afterthought, but it's out there. So when I get to do that awful AA or for the Arts Council, there is now, there is a heading, and it's called literature. And when I look at my budgets and do all that with my financial manager, literature is there and it's a heading. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of right across the organisation now. And it's something as well, even with my management team, that, you know what I mean, we talk about all the programmes, and literature now is out there, and it is a heading. And I suppose as well, the other thing it's allowed us to do, it's allowed us to engage with Dani. and look at other literature programs outside of Live. So like last year with Dani and our Artists in Association, Nicola Pearce, she writes a lot for children and young people. So we came up with this idea of Droichead Diaries, where members of the community, in association with independent newspapers, Droichead Independent, wrote about a day during the pandemic, like a day out of their diary, and they submitted the diary entries to us, and Dani and Nicola kind of chose, you know, 2 or 3 every month, and we published them online and we published them in the newspaper. But we also now get to publish or print the book this autumn with sponsorship from a local printers, and that's something that's going to be coming out in the autumn. So, you know, one is constantly, I suppose, thinking about it and thinking about literature, and like we're involved now in the Lighthouse Project as well. And I guess, you know, it's all about those relationships that Dani has guided us through and allowed us to develop. And yeah, it's just been wonderful. And as I say, literature is now, it's out there, you know, it's part of the conversation, and that's huge.
Thanks, Collette. And I guess, you know, it's been lovely to work with the Live Network and these venues, because I think one of the things that's really important to say is that we have our festival circuit in literature, but the venues in Live Network are outside of key literary festivals. And I guess, you know, we still have festivals, the main festivals in the bigger cities around Ireland. And I guess I'm from regional Ireland myself. And I think that in terms of literature nationally and engagement with reading and engagement with writers and all of that stuff, we really need it to be happening in different geographical locations. And it's been really lovely to bring different writers and different projects to these parts of Ireland where, like you say, they may not have been previously, and it just kind of shows what gaps are there in terms of literary development in general. So it's been really lovely for me to get to work on that, because I think that's really important, that we have that geographical spread of these types of programs. And like you say, you know, everything from, you know, Donal writing letters and Caelainn's tour then, and then something like Douglas Stewart, like there's a really lovely mix there of different projects, you know, and different levels of project, which is great, you know.
Yeah, and just to jump in, just the connection with the library as well, because they're right next door. Do you know what I mean? And it was something that even from day one, I felt the library's right next door. How can we work together? Do you know what I mean? So that relationship has kind of further developed as well. There's a book collective in the town, and with Dani as well, like this book collective meet on a monthly basis, but at 4 points over the year, they get to read a book by an author that we can then bring live, you know what I mean, to the book collective. So, you know, that relationship with our local library as well is key and can't be underestimated either.
Collette, I'm mindful, I suppose, you're the Droichead Arts Centre director, obviously, and the other venues on the network are all distinct venues, and they all have their different spaces and their different kind of offerings. But I guess in the context of the Literature Project Award, and just being mindful of people who are interested in developing something, whether it's a residency type project or an outreach project or a stage-based project, maybe you can talk a little bit about the types of supports, the variants of supports that venues would have, because a lot of writers and literary makers may not necessarily think about the scope of supports, that it isn't just necessarily a stage show or a reading kind of offering, that there are other options there.
No, yes, there's a lot of options. And obviously, you know, I mean, I think artists are at the core of every art centre. I mean, just nationally, you know what I mean? We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for artists, you know, full stop. And I think obviously through the pandemic, a lot of us would have previously had a lot of supports for artists. But obviously with the pandemic and extra funding and capacity funding, we've been able to develop those supports further. So there's always space. I mean, first off, I mean, we have 2 buildings in Droichead. So one has a gallery and a cafe bar and a theatre, but the cafe bar is defunct at the moment. So we have artists in it on pretty much on a monthly basis. And then we're very lucky in that we actually own a Georgian building, and we've now reclaimed a lot of the spaces in the Georgian building, where we've 7 artists working in different spaces all the time, you know what I mean? So there's spaces there for writers. We've Jackie McCarrick, say, for example, who's a playwright, but also finishing her first novel, and she was one of our bursary recipients this year. And she's kind of coming to that end stage where she doesn't want to be at home. She doesn't want to be in her studio. She wants to be somewhere else to get to, you know, over the finishing line. So she's coming in to work in one of our, you know, gorgeous Georgian rooms for the next 2 months, you know. So space is key, and you will find that art centres will provide space, and there is, you know, there is no charge, and we will work with writers across the board. And then, you know, residencies as well. I mean, a lot of us now have bursaries, and like we're about to go into another kind of bursary round for 3 or 4 artists for the autumn. So, you know, you should keep an eye on all of our kind of websites about that. And you know, alongside with the bursaries as well, there could be artists in associations. As I said, last year we had a writer in association for the year. So every year, a lot of the art centres have, you know, artists in association. And there's lots of residencies happening where, you know, you can get paid, say, a stipend. And, you know, it's not about, we don't want to see anything necessarily at the end of it. But what we want to see is you having the opportunity as a writer to work on something for yourself, have a stipend, whether on a 6-month or annual basis, and then have the space to work as well. And also as well, I think the other interesting thing is, you know, outreach programs as well. Like, you know what I mean? Most of the centres, including our own, like we had Dona Ryan on the Yours Sincerely project, we want to kind of do that again. Do you know what I mean? And the idea of being able to connect with say young people and adults through our libraries as well. So it's really about approaching to us. And I say that to artists in all disciplines. Sometimes we can't get out to everybody, but you know, if you're there and you see an art centre and you like the work that we do, you know, all my emails on our website at droichead.com. Send me an email and start the conversation. And maybe this year or early next year, I mightn't be able to work with you, but it's about starting the conversation, and it's about having that dialogue. And a lot of what's happening as well now, you know, if you look at the Lighthouse Project, and I know, Annemarie, you're going to talk about that, but, you know, we're engaging with Dani on that kind of project later this year. And that's about collaboration and bringing people together in different art forms. And you know, that's something that really interests me as well, bringing a writer in with a musician and a singer and a visual artist as well. So do come to us, talk to us.
Yeah, and as Collette is saying there, the venues have a wide geographical spread. So if there's anyone watching this, literary maker or writer who would be interested in developing work, the counties involved are Cavan, Longford, Roscommon, Louth, Tipperary and Kildare. So there are venues in each of those places. So for anyone who might be watching this who's either based in one of those counties or nearby where they could do with, you know, studio space or time to develop a project, yeah, Live Network would definitely be interested in hearing from you, and my details specifically will be attached to this seminar program so people can drop me a line. Caelainn, I know that you were a successful recipient of the Literature Project Award last year for Republic of Shame, your Republic of Shame tour, which did include the connection with Live Network. And as Collette has already mentioned, you did an online event with the Droichead, but there are different interactions happening with the other venues. Maybe you would begin by just letting people know, in the context of your application, what you were hoping to do, what you wanted to do, and kind of what the outline of your project was.
Sure. I think, like Collette said, the Project Award was an opportunity to really collaborate with other people, to bring together people who I'd spoken to for the book, survivors of the institutions, generational survivors of the institutions, and to try and engage with readers and with audiences in a new way, working with venues around the country. Nice to get outside of Dublin and, you know, reach a readership beyond the city where, you know, most events might have been. And so I guess the idea for me, I had seen what Words Ireland did with Annemarie Ní's book, and did a tour and sort of found a new way to interact with the material. And right before the pandemic, I would have done a few readings. I actually was in Droichead at one stage in person and did a reading. And it always struck me how people would come up after and speak to you And, you know, with the nature of what I wrote about in Republic of Shame, the ongoing legacy of the religious run institutions, so many people had stories to tell, and so many people had a need to speak about it, and really seemed to want to engage with this through a conversation or discussion, but also as meeting a lot of people, and it's spoken for the book to a lot of people who had created responses to that ongoing legacy, who were artists, who were writers, who were singers, and had creative responses to their experiences, which I think, again, helped people connect with the issues in the book in a new way. And so applying for the award, we really had sort of a wide ranging idea of events to encourage people to you know, to raise awareness about how this was an ongoing legacy, how many people's lives are still affected by the institutions and the ongoing denial of information and answers, to create space for survivors to speak and to share creative responses, you know, to read from the book, to share some of the testimonies and stories from the book, and really to make sure that that conversation was kept alive and that there was space for conversation in different venues around Ireland. And so that's sort of what we applied with in mind. And it's something I'd never done before. I'd never really organized too many events. And I was really excited to work with the Live Network because, you know, it meant this, you know, connected venues, you know, outside of Dublin, around the country, who could host this and really sort of bring it alive. So that was incredibly helpful when I was applying to work with those venues to sort of build an idea of what we could do. And of course, with the pandemic, then there were a lot of challenges, and I think it's really interesting how we've adapted those events. So, you know, we've had a few online events which have created a space, you know, where survivors have spoken about their experiences or shared songs or shared readings. And because it's been quite a small, you know, sort of group of we wanted to keep it small. It means that people have had a chance to really open up and talk about their own experiences and connect on a level that we wouldn't have even had the chance to, I think, in a live in-person venue. So that's been really moving. I think it's also interesting how the venues have had a lot of courage in hosting this, because actually, you know, there has been some blowback. There has been, you know, some feeling of, well, this is still a controversial subject to talk about. So I think it's been really important to reach actors, you know, outside of Dublin, and in sort of, you know, in areas where there are institutions where this is an issue, this should be a conversation. So those were really powerful. We're also working on a sort of limited podcast series. And then we are doing live in-person events, luckily, now that it's possible again. So it's been a really nice mix. And I also worked with Annemarie on sort of a video, essentially, an online event with Poetry Ireland and Maynooth University, bringing together different artists and writers and speakers to share their own creative responses to the legacy of the institutions. And I think that had a really important impact too. So it's been a chance to collaborate with people, and I think to create space. And we're talking about community engagement. You know, for my book, I think what was most powerful was speaking to people directly affected by this legacy, people who are still searching for answers, and creating some space for them to be heard, I think is so important. And I think the Literary Project Award can be, you know, a great resource for that, both to connect with communities, but, you know, hopefully to create more space for more marginalized voices to be heard, for communities to respond to and engage with, you know, works of literature, and to share their own creative responses. So having never put on something like this before, you know, it's been a great learning experience, and I felt very supported by the venues, and you know, it just has given me a great opportunity. And also through, I should say that through the awards, part of that was also development time for a number of sort of core collaborators who are survivors themselves, to develop their own responses and work on their own creative projects that they then shared through the events. So it was not only the events themselves, but the work and collaboration that we were able to do in our own time. And actually we're offered space by several venues, but due to COVID, that all had to be done online. But I think that is a really important resource if you can think about space to work together and collaborate and develop work, and do feel free to sort of ask for the resources to do that. It's not just the sort of the event itself, it's all the work that goes into developing an event that's meaningful, and really thinking about how you want to connect with readers.
Absolutely, Caelainn, and like you're saying there, I guess like the Literature Project Award, I feel like one of the things that it's doing is now enabling writers and literary makers to become producers in their own right. And I guess in the festival circuit, you know, there are curators and festival directors who mainly decide kind of what the formats are and who's involved. And like you say, it is an opportunity to let people develop work behind the scenes and to respect and honor that time that can really bring something new to the book and to the themes, and like you say, to survivors, both people who present and people who receive, you know, in terms of the audiences. And I guess one of the things that I've thought has been lovely about Republic of Shame is it had its own visibility. Obviously, you're a journalist, and it had a visibility, you know, online through social media and through journalism and those kind of outlets. But I feel that with this particular tour, and you've already kind of mentioned the diversity of the program, you know, and some of the diversity of the program naturally has come from a lot of pivoting during COVID times. But I feel with Republic of Shame, you know, you've had the kind of larger scale events with, say, the National Concert Hall, you know, the kind of the reach of something like that, but then also podcasting and the intimacy of those small groups that we've done online. And then obviously we're hoping to do something very particular in Roscommon, Cavan and Longford, where you previously were saying, you know, in the writing of the book and in the kind of the conversations that happen after publication, I guess, where people, like you say, are coming up and kind of chatting to you and talking about some of the things. And one of the things you'd said to me initially was, you know, what is the feeling in particular counties or places even that we may not fully know or understand what that picture is, you know. And it personally is exciting as a curator and liaison even between you and the network to kind of have those chats about Longford and Roscommon and Cavan, where just for people watching, you'll see this appear soon on the Live Network websites. But we are in those counties reaching out to people for like personal stories and responses to this topic in their counties. So it's kind of like an outreach aspect really that wouldn't necessarily have been there before in the context of, you know, sort of festivals or even sort of a stage event. So it again is a kind of a good example of just a different layer and a different angle on something, you know. So thank you for engaging with the Live Network. And I think the venues, you know, I have to say, commend Collette and the other directors of the Live Network. Like, I have to say, they're very open and very encouraging and supportive of writer-led ideas, you know, and about that idea of kind of directly supporting the artist. I'm going to come back to you and ask you some kind of practical questions, Caelainn, about your learnings. But Annemarie, separate to Live Network, I wear many hats, I suppose, and one of them has been the director of the Lighthouse Project, and you have been one of the writers engaged in that process. So you are working on the Sligo site at the moment for next month with Cordia Arts Festival, and you have just done the work on the Donegal Lighthouse Faunad Head with Errigal Arts Festival. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your engagement with the Lighthouse Project and what it's been like? Oh, you're gone mute again, Annemarie. We've had a technical issue here with the microphone previous to this. Okay, welcome back. Annemarie Ní Churreáin is having some technical issues there, so hopefully she will be able to rejoin me separately to talk about the Lighthouse Project, but we're going to continue on here with Caelainn Hogan and Collette Farrell. Caelainn, in terms of the application process for the Literature Project Award, how did you find the actual application for people who may not have gone for this before. The limit last year was 20,000, this year is 30,000. How did you find the actual application process itself?
I had applied for some Arts Council grants, not successfully before, so I would say to anyone who's applied for any grant through the Arts Council and not gotten it, then keep applying. You know, I definitely got rejected for a fair few, and this was the first successful application, so don't lose heart with it. I think it's a learning process of getting used to kind of maybe what the council is looking for, and really getting a strong idea. So I was sort of familiar, I guess, with the online system and the forms, and it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So I think, yeah, familiarize yourself with that. But it's fairly straightforward in terms of what I was proposing. I'd say probably the most challenging for me was just figuring out the budget, because I'm not really used to writing up budgets for events like this, and balancing the sort of income essentially that you would have from the value of the venues and you know the value that you were sort of getting through being offered space or resources, and then making sure to just acknowledge that and then balance it in the latter part of the budget. So that was something new for me. I'm not brilliant with numbers, so that was I think that probably I spent quite a bit of time on that, just figuring out and you know paying everyone involved fairly too is really important to me, making sure everyone had the resources I needed. And I would say that if you're in a producer role or sort of curating something, I definitely underestimated the work I'd be doing, I think, and didn't really set aside any resources for that. It was more about making sure the speakers got, you know, paid fairly and the resources were there for developing work, but do consider the work that goes into producing something like this, and I think acknowledging that within your budget. Don't be afraid to ask for what you need, you know, to do that work effectively. And then also just, I guess, you know, I'm the usual things with organizing events. I think it's important to make sure people, you know, have their travel covered, their accommodation. These are all considerations. When you're talking about events, again, if you're doing development, providing a space, not everyone has a space to work, and it can be really important to provide that, I think, when you're developing work. So those were considerations that I think were important. And then gathering together the letters of recommendation and CVs for everyone involved. So, you know, we actually were working with quite a large group of people and venues involved. So it was just bringing together all that, making sure I had enough time to chase up and make sure, and everyone was brilliant, you know, they were really on top of it. So, but it does take time to just bring that all together. So I think with the project awards, more so than the individual grant applications, you just have to be aware that it's gathering a lot of information together and confirming everything with people.
Yeah. And you've mentioned there, Caelainn, I guess that key thing of, you know, becoming a producer and then kind of realizing too, you know, how much time there is on all of the odds and ends of that. And this is something that was touched on yesterday in the seminar we recorded then, which was about just emailing time, you know, time to kind of chase up people, time to have conversations. There's a lot of kind of hidden administrative work that can actually take up quite a bit of time in the context of a project. And I suppose that was obviously a learning for you from the process to think and consider that in addition to what you're able to foresee, I guess maybe as even a contingency. Were there any other kind of key things that you've learned along the journey that you think might be helpful to people now who would be considering mounting a project, a literary project?
I think just the experience of collaborating with poets and singers and writers and survivors who are all of those things as well. That was most rewarding for me. And I think that the development work in particular was very meaningful, and I would have almost done more of it. And I think if we had had a space to come together and just spend the days like we had actually been planning to, That is a wonderful thing to do with a project like this, and with a project award like this, the resource that gives you. So I think that's something to think of, and I was glad that I included that, because I wouldn't, have expected it to be as sort of central to the project, but it really meant that we could have discussions around what we wanted these events to be, what was the result we wanted, how did we want to engage with people. And I think even going forward, I might, include the venues in that more, even in those conversations. So I think, like Collette says, if the venue has space and there's a chance to go and really engage in those discussions beforehand, it can make the event even more powerful, I think.
Definitely, and like you say there, Caelainn, and as Collette has mentioned, the development time and space, I think that's such a huge asset. And I guess in the context of being able to work with venues especially, that is a huge bonus. I think there are a lot of writers and makers out there who could really benefit from space, and I think that we're maybe unaware as to how much space there is actually there that's accessible, and like Collette is saying, can be free space to artists, professional artists, to develop work. So again, to kind of just remind people that the supports in something like a Literature Project Award might be outside of the scope of what they might imagine. When we think about a venue, sometimes people just think about the theatre space, but really there are other assets there that I think are hugely helpful in terms of collaboration. One of the things that we talked about yesterday, which I suppose I just wanted to ask both of you before we wrap up, is the introduction of the Literature Project Award, I guess, is an additional award for literature that obviously is now going into its second year. And it's distinct from bursaries and distinct from the other awards, arts grant funding and strategic funding, the other awards that are given. I feel it's a tremendous opportunity for writer-led work and literary makers to make work that is outside of the festival circuit and traditional areas. And there's also a huge opportunity, I think, there for real creative scope in terms of what people want to do. Caelainn, obviously you've been, to loads of festivals around Ireland and different settings and community settings and things like that. What do you think in terms of the contemporary Irish literature scene? What do you think that the Literature Project Award might be able to offer in that area, that could be distinct or different from what's already there?
Well, I think, I've been at some brilliant festivals recently around Ireland, and they draw, a really interesting audience, but they're mainly an audience that I think would naturally, be interested in literature, would go to literary events. And it's not the kind of engagement that I think can be possible always through this award. I think, those festivals are so important, and we have some great ones. But I think that what's interesting through this award is you can do something outside of that circuit and really engage with communities in a different way. And I think what the Live Network has done, even with the letter writing and even with the sort of online events that we had, that really were a chance to open up conversations and for people to share their own experiences and their own stories with, fellow survivors. That was really meaningful. So, I think when it comes to a project award, there's sometimes a sense that it has to be a big event, it has to be like all the other festival events. I would say maybe think differently. Think about how it can be something that has a more meaningful engagement, even if it's with a smaller group of people, and be willing to collaborate with different people, and I think the multimedia aspect can be really interesting, writers having the chance to work with people across different creative forms, using video, thinking about a podcast, different ways to share your work and engage with literature. But also I think it is really important that that this project award creates space for more marginalized voices. I mean, here we are, we're all white women standing around talking about creating space, but I would hope that the Literary Project Award would create space for you know, communities that are more marginalized to have events, you know, and different forms of engagement. And I think that could be an important part of it, you know, as well. Even thinking of people who might be, you know, people in direct provision who can't necessarily travel to certain literary events, you know, that's something I kind of wish I'd put as part of this project, because obviously it's so connected to the ongoing legacy of the institutions. And it's only when you sort of do something like that, you think of all the different opportunities there are. But I would say that having never applied for something like this or put on events like this, you know, I have felt really supported by the venues. And I think, you know, just be ambitious with this award, you know, don't feel like if you haven't put on an event like this that you can't, or that you can't apply for a project award like this. And don't be discouraged if you don't get it, because I've faced a number of rejections from the Arts Council in the past. And you know, rejection sounds that's a lot, but you know, it sometimes just takes time to build the right idea. And you know, I think keep going for it, and yeah, think big, you know, and be ambitious with it.
Thanks, Caelainn. And I suppose, Collette, you've already kind of mentioned about just the ongoing want from the Live Network to engage with literary makers and people to even start those conversations. And I suppose it's important to say that you know, this project, but not just this project award, but also like commissions and other programs that will be out there. The Live Network is an available resource to people going in that direction.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I concur with everything that you've said as well, Caelainn, there. I mean, it's just in terms of the project award, first off, it's an opportunity, as we've all said, maybe to be ambitious and to think a bit kind of differently and work outside of that whole festival circuit. You know, the opportunity to be collaborative and work with other artists in different disciplines as well, and to use, you know, your local venue or a venue or a network of venues as well, and to use us as part, or not to use, but to collaborate with us as part even of the application process as well. And the big thing is, you know, to do that as well, like start the conversation early enough, do you know what I mean? Don't leave it a month before the application, at least, you know, go a bit kind of further back. But start the conversation with us early enough so that we can be there to support you, I suppose, in terms of your application for the project award. Because it is really interesting in terms of, you know, writer-led events, do you know what I mean, in a way. And as you were saying, Caelainn, writers as producers. And yeah, that whole as well. Then the second thing as well is, apart from the artists and everything that it can open up, and the innovation as well that it can open up with the different kind of disciplines potentially working together, is that whole engagement with community as well. And how do we reach out, you know, and between something like a project award and a live network, it kind of allows us maybe to have a greater reach within our community for readers, for people who don't read, do you know what I mean? And for new and new readers, I suppose, in a way. And as well, you know, how can we make it, how can we bring more people in terms of artists and in terms of community, and be truly, I suppose, diverse and inclusive as well, do you know what I mean? And that is hugely challenging, I know, but these are the opportunities that could be there in terms of the project award, and also as well, yeah, in terms of the live network. And yeah, just finally as well about that whole development phase in terms of the project award as well, you know what I mean, the research and development, and that's where venues can come in really strongly as well to give you the space.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining the seminar. It's really nice to have this information. I think, you know, a lot of very practical information on what this process has been like, and what supports there are. If people are watching this and would like to begin a conversation with the Live Network, any of the individual venues or the network, on anything that they're producing or wanting to make, I would love to hear from you. My details will be attached to this seminar. So thank you, Collette, and thank you, Caelainn.
Thanks, Dani.
So welcome back to this seminar. I'm rejoined by Annemarie Ní Churreáin. The connection there was dropped to the other meeting. So we're just going to talk separately here about the Lighthouse Project. So Annemarie, separate to Live Network, I guess, I am the creative director of the Lighthouse Project, and I was a recipient of the Literature Project Award last year to realise this, and you have been one of the writers involved. And I guess just as a quick overview of the project involves a writer and other artists in different parts of Ireland responding to lighthouses, and there was a curatorial brief, but I tried to kind of keep it open in the sense of offering themes and ideas that I thought were interesting to then allow people to come together and collaborate. So you have completed work on the Donegal site, which happened last month at Fonneth Head, and you're currently working on Coney Island and Oyster Island that will launch in September with Curator Arts Festival. So Annemarie, can you maybe talk a little bit about just what it's been like to be part of the Lighthouse Project, and an overview of kind of some of the things that we've done so far and are currently working on?
Sure, and lovely to join you, Dani. For your listeners tuned in, just to say I'm a writer and poet with an interest in writing landscape and collaboration and site-specific work. And when you came to me originally with the invitation to participate in the Lighthouse Project, I think the first thing that was on my mind were the songs of Amergin. And Amergin was, you know, according to mythology, he was this mythical bard who was swept in on a magical wave to the west of Ireland, and he put one foot down on the ground and he declared this spellbinding manifesto that celebrated place and creatures and the body as an extension of the physical landscape. And you know, that was said to be the first poem apparently said aloud in Ireland. And that's how deep, I suppose, the celebration of place runs in the poetic tradition. And so when you came to me with this invitation, I thought, here is a lovely opportunity to kind of step into that world. And I was really excited for a number of reasons to engage with the lighthouses. So you had given me two lighthouses, the Fannad Lighthouse site and the Coney Island site. And I think both being on the west, I knew immediately that I was going to have this chance to indulge my passions and folklore and superstition and fishing folklore and mythology and stories attached to wild places. But I was also really intrigued and compelled by the lighthouse itself. You know, I'm very interested in the subject of bearing witness, and like there's something about the lighthouse as this kind of a symbol or emblem of bearing witness, of warning, of seeing, of recording and reporting that was immediately really meaningful to me and grabbed my imagination. And I think maybe the other reason that I was just really thrilled to be invited to be part of this project was because it's work that I'm interested in, but it's a resourced project, you know. Like I would do a lot of work with sites and with landscape, and I have done that type of work before. But here it was a project with the curator, with collaborators, with funds to visit the site, to spend time on the site, like a real kind of dream project to be involved with. So I know you wanted me to talk a little bit about the work made at the lighthouse sites, and I thought, Dani, that I might concentrate on the Fannad Lighthouse site, because that project is now complete. So I've had a little bit of time to kind of reflect on it, and the other project is still in progress. So we're still in the creative phase of that. So the Fannad Lighthouse project, I was brought together with a filmmaker called Laura Sheeran, and I suppose the invitation to me was to create a textual response to the lighthouse, and to then work with Laura to find a way that that text might occupy or live in the landscape. It was a lovely it was a lovely open brief, actually. That, you know, that was important, that I was able to go to Fanad Lighthouse. We went there as a group to encounter it and to, you know, kind of follow our nose a bit with it. I mean, obviously I had done lots of research on Fanad and the history, and I kind of came to the site, initial site visit there with lots of ideas. But, you know, once we were standing on the site as a trio and we were getting a tour of the lighthouse, like that's really when the textual response began, because that's when, you know, I could really face the landscape as it was and the stories that were being told to us. And just to give you an example, you know, I was kind of reading up about Donegal mythology, but when I actually got to the site, not only was it really beautiful, the Fanad Lighthouse site, and not only were the people really lovely, but the stories that were being told to us were ones of tragedy. And, you know, there's a lot of stories of loss off that coast. And it just really kind of hit me, wow, you know, this lighthouse just had such an important role in the community, and that there's also, as well as beauty, there's a lot of sadness in this landscape. So out of that, I began to think of soothing words, you know, of a text that would offer comfort, of a poem that would kind of weave its own spell and embrace the community there, you know, and speak to the experiences of people who have lived around loss and with loss. So I was thinking about, you know, the Gartan Mother's Lullaby, which is a very famous old lullaby, and I kind of tinkered around with that. And then I eventually arrived at this text, which is titled A Blessing of the Boats by the Village Mothers, where these kind of imagined wise ancestral mothers of the village, they use a word from the Irish language to bless the boats and the bodies of people who are going out to sea. So that was kind of where I ended up after a long process. And the piece is available to watch online. Like, the magic thing for me about the Lighthouse Project and about this text was the collaborative element, and giving it to filmmaker Laura Sheeran, who did something that I couldn't, you know, she translated it visually in a way that, you know, I could never have foreseen possible for the text. So she took this Blessing of the Boats text and created this visual, which is like looking through a keyhole or looking through a telescope and glimpsing the ocean. And it's it almost, you know, I was looking at it recently and I was thinking, it's almost the black and white keyhole image on the screen that she created. It almost looks like some kind of baby scan, you know. Mm-hmm. So all these mysterious, organic, kind of beautifully fluid things started to happen in the collaboration process, where, you know, the themes started to reveal themselves, the mothers of the village started to speak, and then this beautiful video that celebrates mothers and children and female strength and power and pre-Christian kind of culture and identity began to take shape. And you know, the magic happened as sometimes, and as you always hope that it will happen with artistic commissions.
Yeah, like you've said there, Annemarie, I guess, you know, for me too, that was kind of the magic of this project, was being able to bring together people who I felt would have a connection. And I suppose, like, seeing you and Laura work together was amazing, you know, for me, because I independently admire both of your work. And obviously Laura, I'd never met you, never met Laura, and I think if people watch that video online, there is this really seamless, interesting understanding that you both felt about the site and the place. And the context, I suppose, of the Literature Project Award allowed, as you say, for me as a curator, to be able to invite writers into a process where they could collaborate with other artists and create something that was writer led and led from the area of literature, in the sense that Laura in the process and the other artists who have been in the process have all definitely contributed to the vision. But it was really nice to get to see, like you say, something that's text-based or words-based emerge into something else and kind of, you know, develop another skin. And from a budget point of view, you know, I was able to apply for money to allow for you to do site visit and to spend time there, and then to develop the work, which I feel in literature is needed. And we do have bursary awards, but a lot of the time bursary awards can be for, you know, time spent on manuscripts, which is also very much needed. But I think that there's a unique opportunity definitely for curators and artists in the Literature Project Award to look at those kinds of aspects that can really be developed within the context of that budget, for that kind of development time, and the time, you know, for you and Laura to connect and kind of, you know, have a cup of tea. I know, Annemarie, that you have come from a community development background, and you've also been quite active, like in residencies. And I suppose, do you think that there are unique opportunities in the Literature Project Award for artists?
I think it's a very important award, because I don't think that the nature or compulsion to write poetry or make literature does change much, but practice does change, and it's evolving all the time. And when I started writing poetry, like, I couldn't have foreseen the role that technology would have played in the kind of general infrastructure of my practice, or even in collaboration, as was the case with Laura. And also when I started writing, I couldn't have foreseen how, you know, people would want to engage in a more physical way with landscape, including writers that would become, you know, more ecologically concerned. So, you know, whilst poetry on the page is my first love, and it's so important that we honor and respect books, there is also, you know, room within our practice to take literature out into different spaces. And I've personally worked in prisons, I've worked in healthcare settings, I've worked in rape crisis centers, I've worked, you know, in practically every community setting that you can think of. And I think the beautiful thing about a good story, or, you know, a powerful poem, or words, you know, spoken, literary words spoken aloud, is that it can translate into any space, it can inhabit any space. And so this award is like it's really important in terms of supporting writers' practice as well, because it allows us freedom and scope for experimentation, innovation, and for just moving around the world beyond libraries and bookshops and the actual page itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Annemarie, thanks so much for taking time to be part of this. I know you're in Paris at the moment and working away on manuscripts, so thank you so much. For anyone listening who wants to look at the Lighthouse Project, you can find it online through my own website, and it has an Instagram account, Lighthouse Project Ireland, and Annemarie's work with Laura is up on YouTube and is available through the Instagram as well. There's a link there. Annemarie, thanks so much.
Thank you.